An 11-year-old girl walking a familiar half-mile route to her small-town church vanished on a quiet Sunday morning in 2012. Police insisted she must have run away, a theory that never fit and one that produced no evidence, not even a footprint. For 8 years the case sat frozen, the town scarred by a mystery no one could solve, until a dusty box of archived interviews was reopened. Inside, it was a forgotten confession, a statement dismissed at the time that pointed investigators toward a place they had never searched. And when they finally dug there, they unearthed something that should have been impossible to miss. The morning she disappeared began with a kind of stillness that felt borrowed from winter, quiet, pale, and too calm for what was coming. Dawn light slipped across the modest neighborhood where 11-year-old Marissa Caldwell laced her shoes for church, humming the same soft tune she always did when she was nervous or excited. No one in the house recognized that sound as a warning. Her mother, Denise, handed her a small white envelope meant for the offering box. "Go straight there. Honey," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind Marissa's ear. "Text me when you arrive." Marissa rolled her eyes playfully. "Mom, it's just up the road." "I know," Denise replied, tightening her robe around her. "Just humor me." The girl stepped outside into a chilled breeze that carried the smell of wet asphalt. Usually, neighbors were already out sweeping porches, warming cars, walking dogs, but this morning the street felt unfamiliar. Too empty, too still. Marissa hesitated only once, glancing back at the house as if expecting someone to follow. Then she started up the narrow road toward the small white church that always rang its bells at 9. It was only half a mile, a straight path, a walk she'd done dozens of times. She passed the Sanders lawn, where Mr. Sanders knelt beside a row of planters. He looked up when she waved. "You're early today, kiddo." "Choir practice," she called back. "Don't let your flowers freeze." He chuckled, though later he would insist something about her tone sounded off, as if she were rushing to get away from something. A robin watched from a telephone line as she approached the intersection at Pine and Willow, the place where houses gave way to an open stretch of roadside ditch and brush. The pavement here was cracked, the grass low and brown from last week's frost. Cars rarely passed before 9, and none did now. Marissa tugged her jacket tighter and walked faster. At the church, Pastor Alden prepared the sanctuary, arranging hymnals and adjusting the microphone that always squealed when he turned it on. At 9:12 he checked the clock again. The girl was never late. He looked out the window toward the road, expecting to see her small frame hopping up the steps, but the walkway remained empty. By 9:20 he texted Denise. "Everything okay? Haven't seen Marissa yet." Denise stared at her phone, waiting for the buzz of her daughter's confirmation. Instead, her stomach dropped. She called immediately, no answer. She tried again. Still nothing. Within minutes she was in the car, backing out so fast the gravel spit beneath her tires. She drove the familiar route, scanning the roadside for any sign of movement. Nothing. When she reached the church, the pastor was already walking down the steps, worry replacing his usual calm. "I thought she might have stopped to talk to someone," he said. "No," Denise whispered. "She walks straight here, always." Together, they retraced the half-mile path on foot, calling her name into the wind. A few neighbors emerged onto porches, leaning forward as if the air carried a question just out of reach. One of them, Mrs. Hartwell, wrung her hands and said, "I heard something earlier." "I think I did." "What kind of something?" Denise asked. "I don't know," she said, shaking her head. "A shout maybe? Or a car door slamming." It was quick. "Where?" "Mrs." Hartwell lifted a trembling hand toward the intersection at Pine and Willow. "Over there, but I might be wrong. I'm not sure anymore." By noon, police cruisers lined the street. Officers fanned out along the ditch, their boots compressing the frosted grass Marissa had walked past just hours earlier. They found no footprints, no dropped belongings, no signs of a struggle. It was as if she had simply dissolved into the cold morning air. As Denise stood at the intersection, staring at the empty road, a single thought surfaced through her panic: someone had been out here, someone who shouldn't have been. and yet no one could agree on what had been heard or whether anything had been heard at all. The place where the scent trail would later vanish. The place where the first truth was almost found. A neighbor's vague report hints at a sound near the intersection, but no two witnesses describe it the same way. The first search began under a sky that couldn't decide between rain or sunlight, throwing shifting shadows across the neighborhood where Marissa had last been seen. For the officers who arrived that afternoon, it felt like a routine missing child call, nothing unusual, nothing urgent. A runaway, one of them quietly implied as he filled out the initial form. Kids left home all the time, they always came back. But Denise Caldwell heard those words and felt something inside her snap. She didn't run away, she said, her voice raw. She was excited for choir, she had her offering envelope, she didn't run. Officer Brantley gave a practiced, sympathetic nod. "We'll canvass the area, ma'am. She's probably hiding out at a friend's house." That assumption cost hours. Hours that should have led to her. Volunteers started appearing just after 3 p.m. Teachers, neighbors, people from church, carrying flashlights, walking sticks, and hastily printed photos of the smiling girl in her denim jacket. They fanned out across ditches, backyards, and the thin line of woods that bordered the far side of Pine and Willow. The temperature had dropped again, bringing a sharp wind that whipped through the brush, carrying the sound of voices calling her name. "Marissa. Sweetheart, it's Mom, answer me." A search coordinator named Lewis, an ex-firefighter with a square jaw and calm authority, took charge when it became clear the police weren't moving fast enough. He spread a map across the hood of his truck and jabbed a finger at the highlighted route. "She walked this every Sunday?" "Yes," Denise said. "And it's only half a mile." "Yes." He exhaled, baffled. "This should have been a 15-minute walk. It's impossible. She just vanished." He divided the volunteers into teams. Field sweeps, drainage ditches, the thin creek bed running behind the church. Every inch was to be checked in tight grids, no more than 3 feet apart, a method that rarely failed in cases with such a short travel path. But this time, nothing worked. One team found a set of small footprints near the Sanders property, but they led nowhere, ending abruptly on dry pavement. Another group searched the roadside ditch, wading through mud and brambles, only to emerge scratched and empty-handed. By sunset, the search perimeter had tripled, even though logic argued it shouldn't have needed to grow at all. During a tense moment near dusk, Lewis approached a pair of officers. "Hey," he said quietly, "you checked the creek underpass yet?" "We're prioritizing runaway logic until we get evidence otherwise," one replied. Lewis stared, incredulous. "A runaway doesn't vanish halfway to church. She would have walked the rest of the way, or turned around. This is an abduction corridor." The officer shrugged. "We follow protocol." Protocol. Another word that cost more time. Just after dark, the bloodhound arrived, a floppy-eared hound named Baxter, experienced in dozens of searches. The handler lifted a small plastic bag containing the scent article, Marissa's jacket, from her bedroom chair. "Everyone step back," he instructed. "Give him silence." Baxter sniffed the jacket, sneezed, then lowered his head to the ground, pulling hard toward the sidewalk. The small crowd held its breath as he moved with confidence, tracking the girl's final steps past the Sanders house toward Pine and Willow. His tail swayed with purpose. Then he slowed, stopped, turned in a confused circle. At the exact intersection where Mrs. Hartwell had heard the strange noise, the dog hesitated, whining softly. The handler crouched beside him, whispering commands. Baxter pressed his nose to the pavement again, once, twice, and then lifted his head, scent trail gone as if the world had swallowed it whole. "He's lost it," the handler murmured. "Right here." "Lost it?" Denise asked, clutching her arms around herself. "Ma'am, that means she either left this area by vehicle, or—" He didn't finish the sentence. The search continued into the night, with spotlights sweeping across fields and helicopters circling overhead. The town felt smaller with every hour, the darkness pressing in like a closing fist. But there were no screams, no footprints, no torn clothing, nothing to suggest a struggle, nothing to explain why she wasn't found. And as the last volunteers drifted home, shivering and exhausted, one chilling truth settled over the entire community. This was the kind of disappearance that wasn't supposed to be possible. The scent trail dies instantly at the same intersection, suggesting she left the ground there, or was taken before anyone noticed. The man who would later reshape the entire investigation first appeared in the case as nothing more than a name scribbled in the margins of an officer's notebook. No bold highlight. No marker. Just a passing footnote from the earliest canvassing, an afterthought that no one bothered to examine closely. His name was Alan Drexler, a quiet, solitary man who lived 3 blocks from the intersection where Marissa's scent trail vanished. He occupied a sagging rental home with peeling paint, closed curtains, and a yard littered with rusted tools. In a town where everyone knew everyone, Alan was the exception, known only by whispers, assumptions, and the uneasy feeling he carried with him wherever he went. On the evening of Marissa's disappearance, Officer Brantley and his partner knocked on Alan's door as part of routine house-to-house checks. The porch light flickered on, illuminating Alan's thin face and unblinking eyes. "What's this about?" he asked, voice low and steady. "We're looking for a missing girl," Brantley said, holding up a photo. 11 years old. Walked past Pine and Willow this morning. Alan glanced at the picture for no more than a second. "Didn't see her." Brantley waited. Alan didn't continue. "Were you home today?" "Mostly." "Did you leave at all?" Alan scratched the back of his neck, gaze drifting to the floorboards. "Went out for a bit. Groceries." "What time?" "Morning." "Do you have a receipt?" "No, paid cash." The partner made a note. Brantley didn't push further. It was routine, nothing unusual. But later, Denise would insist that his expression, the quick flick of his eyes toward the road, held something deeper, something unsettled. Inside the house, behind Alan's shoulder, Brantley had noticed something else. A stack of folded tarps on the floor, each one stained with something dark. When asked, Alan provided the simplest explanation possible. "I work on engines sometimes." It was enough to satisfy the officer. Enough to move on, but not enough to explain the unease the man left behind. Throughout the following week, as the search intensified and the community tightened around the Caldwell family, Alan's presence floated like a faint shadow along the edges of conversation. Neighbors described him with contradictory impressions: odd, quiet, keeps to himself, harmless, sometimes off. No one could pinpoint why he made them uncomfortable, only that he did. A local teenager told investigators he had once seen Alan burning something in his backyard late at night. Another reported hearing loud thuds from inside the house. But none of it was actionable. And with no physical evidence linking him to the disappearance, Alan remained categorized as a person interviewed. Nothing more. Then came the moment, the cryptic line that would later become the hinge of the entire case. It happened in the cramped back room of the station, where Alan sat across from 2 detectives, arms crossed, breathing slow. They questioned him again about his morning routine, about the route he took to the store, about the window of time where his whereabouts couldn't be confirmed. At one point, unprompted, Alan muttered, almost to himself, "Kids should know better than to walk alone." The younger detective paused. "What do you mean by that?" Alan stared at him, expression unreadable. "World's not as safe as people like to pretend." "Are you saying you saw her?" "No," Alan replied, "just making an observation. It was nothing explicit, nothing incriminating. But it was off." The statement was logged. The interview was concluded. And like so many clues in the early hours of the case, it quietly drifted into the background, overshadowed by larger theories, louder tips, and the police department's reluctant insistence that Marissa had likely run away. What no one realized then was that Alan had already told them something important, not overtly, not directly, but in the way he chose his words and the way he avoided others. His carefulness wasn't normal. His composure wasn't natural. And 8 years later, when investigators reopened his file, that single unexplored comment would become the thread that finally unraveled everything. But back in that first week, Alan simply faded into the outskirts of the case just as he preferred. His cryptic remark is logged and forgotten, until a rediscovered tape, years later, reveals what he truly meant. For most families, time softens. But for the Caldwells, time calcified, solidifying into a hard, unmoving weight that settled over every room of their home. The first year, after Marissa vanished, was filled with vigils, flyers, interviews, and desperate hope. By the second year, hope had thinned into ritual. By year 5, even rituals began to crumble. Denise stopped sleeping in their bedroom. Instead, she spent her nights at the dining table, sorting and resorting through binders of reports, timelines, sketches, anything that could keep her daughter alive on paper, if not in the world. Her husband, Mark, coped differently. He drove endlessly. He searched for tire tracks, abandoned buildings, anything that might whisper her name. One night, after returning home long past midnight, he told Denise, "I keep thinking she's out there somewhere waiting for us to find her." Denise didn't look up from the stack of documents in her lap. "Then why haven't we?" Mark had no answer. The town changed too. In the early years, people left flowers near the intersection where the scent trail vanished. Children were walked to school in groups. Doors stayed locked. Conversations lowered to whispers any time the Caldwell name drifted near. But as the years passed, fear dulled into resignation. New families moved in, old ones moved away. The intersection lost its memorials, lost its meaning to all but a handful of people who couldn't forget. Among them was retired Officer Hale, a man whose conscience never let him detach from the case. He had been there on the first day, watching a mother collapse on the roadside as volunteers swept the ditch. He had stood beside the bloodhound when it lost the trail. He had been in the room when Alan Drexler offered his cryptic commentary. The case still visited him in the quiet hours of the night. So when the police department moved storage facilities during a remodel in year 8, Hale volunteered to assist, claiming he couldn't stand sitting around the house. But as he waded through towers of mislabeled boxes, his real motive sharpened. He hoped for something everyone else had missed. He didn't expect to actually find it. The box was water-stained, wedged behind a collapsed shelving unit, its label smeared beyond recognition. Inside were cassette tapes, interview recordings from the first week of the investigation. Some were duplicates, some were unlabeled. One, however, had a piece of masking tape stretched across the front with a faded handwritten note. Drexler, second interview, full. Hale frowned. He remembered the second interview, but not the existence of a full recording. The official file contained only a short transcript, bare bones, incomplete, missing what he had always felt to be the tensest parts of the conversation. He picked up the tape, weighing it in his palm. Why was this boxed separately? And why was it never logged? Late that evening, Hale sat alone in the dim back room of the station with an old tape player whirring on the desk. The recording crackled to life, filling the space with the low hum of static and the clipped voices of two younger detectives. For the first several minutes, the conversation followed familiar patterns, routine questions, routine answers. Then came a portion Hale did not recognize, a stretch of audio omitted from the transcript. His breath caught when he heard Drexler's voice take on a colder tone. "You're asking the wrong questions," Drexler muttered. "What should we be asking?" the detective replied. There was a long pause, a wet click of Drexler's tongue. "You should be asking," he said, "why she didn't keep walking." Hale rewound it, played it again, and again. The line seemed simple, but it wasn't. Not to someone who had walked that route 100 times. Not to someone who knew the geography of the abduction site intimately. For a girl to not keep walking, something had to stop her. And Drexler had spoken as if he knew exactly what that something was. The retired officer stood abruptly, the tape player still spinning behind him, its static hissing like a warning finally heard too late. Someone had missed this. Someone had filed it wrong. Someone had buried a confession not explicit, but damning enough that it should have changed everything 8 years earlier. Hale grabbed his coat, clutching the tape in his fist. There was a location mentioned later in the recording, a place investigators had never searched, a place Drexler referenced indirectly, as if assuming they had already been there. They hadn't. And now, after 8 years of silence, the case had a pulse again. The tape hints at a specific, never-searched location, one that could finally explain what happened the morning Marissa vanished. The land behind the abandoned shed felt wrong the moment investigators stepped onto it, quiet in a way that didn't match the rest of the rural property. No animals rustled, no insects chirped. Even the wind seemed to lose its voice as it passed through the leaning boards of the structure. It was the kind of silence that made seasoned officers glance at one another without speaking. Detective Rowan, now leading the reopened case, held the recovered tape in one hand and the search warrant in the other. According to Drexler's wording, he murmured, scanning the overgrown patch of earth, "This is where she didn't keep walking." Beside him, retired Officer Hale exhaled slowly. He had imagined this place 100 times in the hours since rediscovering the tape, but reality made his throat tighten. The ground sloped slightly downward behind the shed, forming a shallow basin of dirt and tangled weeds. Old tire ruts curved into a half circle, as if a vehicle had once backed up to this very point. The excavation team arrived just after dawn. Heavy boots crunched through frost as they unloaded shovels, tarps, and a small mechanical digger. A forensic anthropologist, Dr. Kessler, crouched near the earth, running a gloved hand across its surface. "This ground's been disturbed," she said quietly. "Not recently, but not naturally, either." Hale felt the hairs on his arms rise. "Then start here," he said. The digging began. At first, it was methodical, measured scoops, slow layers peeled back in squares, the steady grind of metal scraping earth. But, as the soil loosened, tension thickened. Investigators watched in stillness, each waiting for a discovery they feared and hoped for in equal measure. A foot or two down, they struck a patch of tightly compacted dirt. "Different soil composition," Dr. Kessler noted. "Keep going." The next layer released a faint, sour scent, a trapped pocket of air escaping from long-buried ground. Hale stepped back instinctively. Then a shovel hit something soft. "Stop," Kessler ordered. The team froze. She knelt, brushing away dirt with slow, deliberate strokes. A corner of fabric emerged, faded, frayed, dirt-stained, but unmistakable, a small white pattern. The embroidered flower. The offering envelope's pattern. Denise had sewn that flower herself onto Marissa's jacket pocket. A stunned silence settled over the crew, heavy as the morning fog. Rowan swallowed hard. "Mark it, photograph everything before we proceed." As cameras clicked, Hale closed his eyes. He had prepared himself for this possibility, rehearsed it in his mind, but the reality devastated him. He pictured Marissa's last morning, her careful steps, her soft humming, and he pictured this place cold, isolated, hidden in plain sight. Once documentation was complete, the team continued excavating with brushes and gloved hands. Beneath the fabric, the soil shifted away to reveal something pale, bone, small, fragile, unmistakably human. The forensic tech whispered, "Oh God." But the discovery didn't end there. A second object surfaced, a thin metal chain, a necklace. The one Marissa had worn every Sunday, engraved with a tiny silver cross. Denise had given it to her on her 10th birthday. Hale felt his knees weaken. Then Rowan stiffened. "Everyone, look at this." Embedded in the soil just inches from the remains was a shape too deliberate to be accidental. A shallow impression of rubber treads, ancient, but still discernible. Tire marks. Tires that had reversed into position, just as the indentation pattern suggested. Exactly where the dog had lost the trail 8 years earlier. "She didn't walk here," Rowan said, voice low and tight. "She was brought here." The atmosphere thickened with a dread that felt nearly physical. Officers exchanged glances, each word traded in hushed tones, as if the ground itself were listening. But the most chilling moment came when one of the forensic techs unearthed a small, rusted object, a piece of metal shaped like a latch hook. Hale stared at it. "That's from a passenger side door panel, early 2000s truck model. The same model Alan Drexler had driven before selling it years after the disappearance." Rowan straightened. "We're done waiting. Bring him in." As officers began packing equipment, sealing evidence bags, and roping off the excavation site, Hale remained standing over the disturbed patch of earth. Frost melted under the rising sun, soaking into the ground where Marissa's jacket had been buried. 8 years. 8 years this place had held the answer. And now that they had found it, one truth became impossible to ignore. Drexler hadn't misled them in that forgotten confession. He had guided them quietly, cryptically straight to the place where he thought nobody would ever dig. As the team prepares to arrest Drexler, one final piece of unearthed evidence hints that Marissa may not have been his only victim, and the ground behind the shed might hold more secrets. The interrogation room felt smaller than usual, its dim overhead light casting a hard glow across the metal table where Alan Drexler now sat, hands folded, eyes fixed on the wall behind Detective Rowan, as though something there mattered more than the evidence stacked in front of him. For 8 years, he had lived quietly, unnoticed, unbothered, but the ground behind the shed had finally spoken for him. Rowan pressed the play button on the recovered tape recorder. Drexler's own voice filled the room, grainy, indifferent. "You should be asking why she didn't keep walking." A muscle flickered in Drexler's jaw, but he said nothing. Rowan leaned forward. "We dug where you pointed us. We found her jacket, her necklace, her remains, and tire impressions that matched the truck you owned in 2012. Silence. "You knew exactly where she was," Rowan continued, "because you put her there." Drexler blinked slowly, as if waking from a deep sleep. "She didn't keep walking," he murmured, almost dreamlike. That part was true. Retired Officer Hale watched from the corner of the room. He had wanted this moment for nearly a decade, but now that it was here, he felt only a shivering exhaustion. Justice never arrived cleanly. It came dripping with the weight of everything lost. Rowan pushed a photo across the table, the small embroidered flower Denise had sewn onto the jacket pocket. "Why that location? Why take her there?" For a long moment, Drexler didn't move. Then, in a voice roughened by years of silence, he said, "Because it was quiet. No one goes back there. No one ever has a reason to." His fingers twitched against the metal tabletop. "She wasn't supposed to scream." Hale's breath caught. Rowan steadied his tone. "Walk us through what happened." Drexler shook his head. "Won't change anything." But the truth had to be spoken, if not for the investigation, then for the family who had spent 8 years trapped in the limbo of not knowing. Rowan tried again. "You waited by the intersection." A faint nod. "You watched her walk." Another nod. "Why her?" Drexler stared at the mirrored glass. "She was alone. People shouldn't walk alone." The confession unfolded in pieces, not as a dramatic release, but as a slow collapse, as though each word cost him something to drag into existence. He described stepping from his truck, offering her a ride to the church when she hesitated at the intersection. She refused. He insisted. When she tried to walk away, he grabbed her arm. Panic surged. The situation escalated beyond anything he claimed he intended. "She fell," he said softly. "I didn't mean. But she fell." The forensic evidence would later dispute parts of his story, but not the core of it. Not the horror of the moment he realized what he'd done. He panicked, loaded her into the truck, and drove to the abandoned shed where he had once repaired engines as a teenager. The ground was soft, then recently turned from heavy rains. Easy to dig, easier to hide. As Drexler spoke, Hale's eyes drifted to the evidence bag on the table, the rusted latch hook found in the soil. Rowan noticed his glance. "We found something else at the dig site," Rowan said quietly. "Not hers." A small object slid across the table. Another piece of fabric, discolored, different size, different stitching. Drexler froze, his face drained of what little color it held. Rowan leaned in. "She wasn't the only one, was she?" The room seemed to constrict. Drexler's lips parted, but no sound emerged. His fingers curled into fists. A tremor passed through his shoulders, fear, not remorse. "We'll find them," Rowan said. "All of them." For the first time, Drexler's gaze broke. He looked not at Rowan, not at the table, but at the floor, as if seeing ghosts rise through the concrete. Outside the interrogation room, Hale stepped into the hallway, pressing his back against the wall. His hands shook. 8 years he had believed the case was a single tragedy, a single girl lost on a quiet Sunday morning. Now he understood that the moment Marissa didn't keep walking, someone else's footsteps had already been silenced long before hers. When Rowan finally emerged with the signed confession, Hale asked only one question. "Do we tell the family tonight?" Rowan nodded. They deserve to know, all of it. And miles away, in a home where Marissa's room had remained untouched for nearly a decade, Denise Caldwell felt something shift in the air, like the echo of an answer she had waited too long to hear, carrying with it closure, devastation, and a new haunting. If Drexler chose that ground for Marissa, who else was buried in silence? The truth brings closure, but also uncovers a chilling possibility that Marissa's disappearance was only one chapter in a story the town never realized it was living.